Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, we're unpacking a really fascinating universal dilemma today, one that honestly touches literally every aspect of our lives. It's called the paradox of knowledge. We're going to dive into exactly why ignorance is bliss and awareness. Well, awareness can be kind of hellish. Let's get right into it. Let me start by asking you something. Why does knowing more often make us feel worse? I mean, think about your own life for a second. Have you ever felt that creeping sense of burnout or just that daily low-grade anxiety when you're scrolling the news or when you uncover some massively complex problem at work? We're taught from day one that knowledge is power, right? But what if the actual act of acquiring that knowledge is the very root of our exhaustion? See, we're constantly navigating this exact friction. On one hand, you've got the bliss of ignorance. It's low effort, it's comfortable, it's warm, and man, it feels incredibly safe. But on the other hand, the hell of knowledge. It's high effort. It's a heavy, heavy burden that's often cold and relentlessly demanding. Every single day, whether we realize it or not, we're caught between the cozy safety of just not knowing and the exhausting reality of awareness. It's a choice we make constantly. But here's the wild part. This isn't just some modern anxiety caused by smartphone alerts or the 24-hour news cycle. Let's look at the origins of this concept. A mythological choice. This friction is actually baked right into the root of human consciousness. It's in our oldest stories. In the spiritual era, you've got the tree of knowledge. The human story literally starts in a paradise of total unawareness. But the absolute second that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil is eaten, eyes are opened, Eden is lost, and the agonizing journey of earthly responsibility kicks off. Or look at Greek mythology. Humans are living in this primitive, warm ignorance until Prometheus steals fire, which represents science, technology, and knowledge, and hands it over to humanity. And the result? Prometheus gets eternal punishment, and we get civilization, complete with deadly weapons and existential anxiety. Oh, and as a direct punishment for that knowledge, Pandora's box is sent to Earth. Pure curiosity to know what was inside unleashed all the world's evils. So across completely different cultures, transitioning from primitive comfort to conscious knowledge always exacts a terrible price. Moving on to our next section. Ignorance as political control. Zooming out from ancient myths to our modern societal structures today, how is this awareness managed at a macro level? Well, consider agnotology. It's the actual scientific study of the deliberate manufacturing of ignorance. You see, knowledge and ignorance aren't just personal feelings. They are highly effective tools for managing populations. Authorities and massive corporations sometimes intentionally spread ignorance or confusion to protect their own interests. Why? Well, it's infinitely easier to lead a public that stays comfortably in the dark. They don't demand rights, they don't critique policies, and they essentially live in this false peace under paternalistic authorities. But what happens when you step out of that unaware crowd? You take on the burden of the educated individual. The fully aware person basically becomes a burden to the system, and honestly, a burden to themselves. You see the systemic flaws, you spot the corruption, but then it hits you. You can't actually fix it all by yourself. That creates a really intense feeling of alienation, marginalization, and sometimes outright persecution. It is literally the sheer crushing weight of knowing way too much in a world that prefers not to know. This entire dynamic is captured perfectly, and kind of chillingly, by George Orwell in his novel 1984, with the phrase, "Ignorance is strength." It's this profound realization that keeping the masses in absolute ignorance grants absolute stability and strength to the system. An unaware public simply doesn't have the linguistic or intellectual tools to even conceptualize rebellion. Which brings us to our third section, the curse of knowledge at work. Let's bring this down from the grand political stage to something we all deal with, the daily grind. Has this ever happened to you? You're trying to explain a super basic task to a junior colleague, and you are pulling your hair out because they just don't get it. Well, you, my friend, are experiencing the curse of knowledge. This is a cognitive bias where an expert automatically assumes the person they're talking to has the exact same foundational background that they do. Because you know so much, you literally cannot remember what it's like to not know. Expertise itself ends up turning communication and team management into a frustrating hell of misunderstandings. This perfectly illustrates the ultimate workplace paradox. Look at the average blissfully unaware employee. They come in, do their assigned task, ignore the company's financial strategy, and clock out completely relaxed. Now look at the highly competent, fully aware employee. Because they have deep knowledge, they see all the structural flaws in management, they anticipate crises weeks before they happen, And how are they rewarded for this incredible awareness? Usually with more work, heavier responsibilities, no extra appreciation, and a one-way ticket to rapid burnout. At work, high awareness is almost always penalized with pure exhaustion. Next up, let's explore the biological and legal costs. Let's zoom in even closer, right down to the very cells in our bodies. From a purely biological standpoint, ignorance is absolutely bliss. Why? Because your brain alone consumes about 20% of your body's total energy. Evolutionarily speaking, ignorance is incredibly economical. When you rely on habits and ready-made assumptions, your brain gets to stay in this low-energy resting state. You're saving calories. But true learning, critical thinking, facing shocking truths, that demands neuroplasticity. You are literally rewiring your neural pathways, which requires intense biological effort. That is exactly why you feel so physically drained after a few hours of deep critical thinking. Knowledge literally burns you out. However, we have to confront a hard limit to this bliss, especially when we hit the legal system. Ignorantia juris non excusat. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You might feel totally safe and blissful in your lack of awareness, say not realizing a certain action is actually a cybercrime or a privacy violation. But the absolute second you break the rule, that false bliss shatters. In the legal realm, the illusion of safety just vanishes, and full criminal and civil liability hits you hard. So here, knowledge isn't the hell. Knowledge is your only true shield. And finally, our last section, the matrix choice, the red pill. So we're constantly surrounded by the heavy costs of being aware and the very seductive comforts of staying ignorant, which brings us to the ultimate modern pop culture metaphor for this exact dilemma. We are always standing before these two options. The blue pill represents going back to simulated sleep, living in a comfortable, stable, yet completely fake world of blissful ignorance. It is the bliss of the herd. But on the other side, the red pill, you wake up to a harsh, destroyed reality. You're facing endless toil, anxiety, and the massive burden of responsibility. But in exchange for all of that pain, you gain the only thing of true value, absolute, genuine freedom. And that leaves us with one final, profound question to ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. Will you choose the comfortable bliss of the herd or the heavy, exhausting burden of freedom? Because while ignorance might indeed be bliss, it is the bliss of captivity. Knowledge, with all of its hellish, exhausting demands, is the only true home of the free. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.